Good afternoon to both of us, because Pacific time now is 1 p.m.
Right.
So introduce yourself first.
I'm Quinton Smith. I'm an assistant professor at the University of California, Irvine in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. My main research focus is how do mechanical stimuli impact how stem cells mature and organize themselves into tissues.
Tissue regeneration, is that something that you wanted to work on since I guess you started your scientific career?
It was kind of like a transition. So I was really interested in like genetics. So when I was an undergrad, I worked in a molecular epidemiology lab. So the idea is, can we identify particular markers in your genome that make you predisposed for cancer or like heart disease risk? So did a lot of like DNA isolations, and I thought that was cool. But then I was able to do like an internship about stem cells, and that completely changed my perspective on science. So now I'm really interested in like the promise of stem cells as like a regenerative therapy.
This is a question that actually was suggested by viewers. What motivates you as a scientist?
So for me, I think it's just like the freedom that you have to like use your own creativity to answer a problem, which is typically, not the norm when you're doing, schoolwork or any other types of jobs. It's just like, I want to study this and maybe we can attack it in many different perspectives. So that's what kind of motivates me.
That's awesome. How did you select your training environments?
Right. So I'm originally from New Mexico. So I went to undergrad at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. So I think proximity, being close to home, was one of the factors that influenced me. And as I mentioned, I was able to do undergraduate research. So I was like a lab technician. It's like washing dishes like for the first year before I had the opportunity to extract DNA and do other things. But yeah, I think just working as a lab tech really helped me kind of get my feet wet in terms of science. But then, it was a very heavy molecular bio lab. So I applied to different internships my sophomore year. So I was part of like an NIH, NIDDK program very early on. So the idea was like, can we look at, they're called single nucleotide polymorphism. I think this is a little too specific. Yeah. It was on its relation with melanoma. So that was like my first introduction to science. I was able to do this really cool immersive program through NIH, but I wanted to do something a little bit more engineering. So my lab manager at the time encouraged me to apply for different internship programs. Okay. So I applied and I was like waitlisted into like all the programs. I was a little sad, but then I got the opportunity to go to Johns Hopkins Institute for Nanobiotechnology. They have a really cool RU program. So there I was matched up with Dr. Sharon Garrett. She focuses on vascular tissue engineering. She's really interested in oxygen and other things. So I had the opportunity to work in her lab as a sophomore student.
Yeah.
And then I came back the following summer as a junior, and I worked at a national lab doing other things, but I wanted to apply to graduate school to kind of have this more degrees of freedom. And I applied to Hopkins, and I was matched up with the same mentor that I had as an undergraduate student over the summer RU program. So like that completely changed my entire trajectory.
Yeah,
so
that's amazing.
Very early on, yeah.
And then how did you pick your postdoc? Is this more to build more on your engineering skill because you did your postdoc at MIT here?
Right. So, I applied broadly. I was like really interested in like electronics and like gene editing and like material science. So I broadly applied to several different labs, but I had the opportunity. I also applied to like a liver tissue engineering lab that has more of like a clinical and translational focus under the mentorship of Dr. Sangeeta Bhatia and the Koch Institute. And that was like, the idea was like, can we kind of translate some of the in vitro tools that we use in the lab to look at how stem cells respond to different environments as actually building like tissues for transplantation, actually using this like regenerative medicine approaches. So that's what kind of led me into Dr. Bhatia's lab as a postdoc.
So how long have you been a faculty first?
So I started April 2021.
Wow.
So
it's been, how has it been so far?
It's been very exciting. A lot of new things, starting a lab from scratch at a different institution on your own without any support, like any like students or like, other people has been an interesting thing. But it's been great. It's been really eye-opening. I didn't realize like a lot of the behind the scenes in science. So like, just having a budget and organizing what pieces of equipment that you need. I think, at MIT, we're very privileged to an extent because it's like we have this like wealth of resources that are at our disposal.
Mhm.
But when you're kind of building a lab from scratch, it's like, maybe I can't get that $1 million confocal microscope. So I've been learning to like, try to budget, from a startup perspective, like budget your funds and being able to build that team. So it's been really challenging in that sense of like going from someone who's just only thinking about the next experiment
Yeah,
to actually thinking about how to build a lab and like a training environment for the next student. So that's been very interesting.
I
Kind of
see.
moving.
So do you think the planning phase is the most challenging aspect of being a faculty so far?
That, and then, I taught my first quarter. So we're in the quarter system at UCI.
Right.
So I taught, in the fall. So that was another juggling piece, right? So,
Yeah.
as a faculty member, you have your research, you have your teaching, and you also kind of have your service elements.
Yes.
So you kind of want to balance all three of those things. So
Wow. Yeah.
just a lot of new challenges, but it's been exciting.
So what do you do to, cope with all of this, new stresses, like a lot of tasks to accomplish? I bet your day's fully packed, and thank you for making time for today.
So, I'm taking advantage of the weather out here in California. So I've been trying to run. I think when I first started, I was like every day running, but definitely going outside and just like going to the beach has been something that's been super relaxful for me. Allows me to like gain a little bit perspective. So for me, going out to nature, Los Angeles is nearby, San Diego's nearby. So I kind of have, these little hot spots where I can kind of get away from campus a little bit to decompress.
That's great. How do you make time for yourself after the work?
So it's, COVID obviously has, brought about new challenges, but I recently moved into a new office space.
Mhm.
I set up my monitor and everything there. And for me, I've tried to create a space where I have my workspace and I have my home space. So trying to be as efficient in my work environment and trying to separate that from my home environment. That's been really important for mental health.
That's good. Speaking of COVID times, I know that you went on the job market right as COVID, kind of hit and there was a shutdown. What was that process like?
Yeah, that was a very crazy time. I remember I was interviewing at Columbia, catching the train, going out in New York City, and then like 2 weeks later, it shut down. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it was kind of crazy. But I think, you know, understanding that there are a lot of things that are out of your control kind of gave me a little bit of ease. And I think, COVID has put that perspective in a lot of different people's minds, so it was difficult to cope with. It was a challenging academic market. Many institutions, did hiring freezes. But for me, it was just like this idea, like, I can't control these external factors, and just tried to move forward with like the best opportunities ahead. But it was very stressful, definitely applying during, the pandemic. I think it was really exciting pre-pandemic. I was really interested in these different spaces, but COVID presented its own challenges. So
Yeah. How did you celebrate accepting the offer?
yeah, that was
A faculty job offer, you accepted it, and like, how do you celebrate that moment?
well, obviously with COVID, it was just like, it was kind of like isolating a little bit. You get an email. So literally I just like Zoomed with my family, and just people that are close to me. And we just had like a nice conversation. So I don't think I did like an official celebration, no champagne, no dinner, but it was just like, I just called my family and just like explained like, this is an amazing opportunity, I was accepted to an academic position. So, and that went well for me, in the sense like I didn't need, all the dinners or anything like that. Just like talking to your close friends and loved ones was just so meaningful. Like everyone was really proud, and it meant a lot to me.
Awesome. What did you do first thing when you like walked into your lab?
Well, had a temporary lab space. Now I actually have like a actual lab, but the first thing is just like I showed my parents.
Oh yeah.
So we kind of walked into this space. It was nice. And, they were able to see some of like the laboratory equipment. It's been Irvine has been really gracious, and putting up the temporary space before my labs was renovated. So just like kind of showed my family when I was there, and yeah.
A random question: what's the like most expensive, coolest thing you've bought so far?
A 3D bioprinter.
Oh wow! And
Yeah.
is the plan to use it to print tissue?
Yeah, so we're actually using this to build tubular structures and larger tissues to understand how architecture informs how stem cells organize.
What was the selection process for, the institution that fit you best? How did you identify that part?
That's a really good point. So, for me, it was really important that I would be in a collaborative environment that where you have people that kind of appreciate the science that you do. So for example, UC Irvine has a dedicated stem cell center, which has been really grateful to talk to like-minded people who are also interested in that type of science. And for me, since I do work with human stem cells, funding opportunities are really important. So we're in a very unique environment. So we have the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, and it's a ballot initiative in California where we can actually access funds to do stem cell research. So that's really important, as you're navigating your careers, like, are there resources, communities that can help support some of the ideas that you have?
That's excellent. What are some of your hobbies? What do you do besides taking time to appreciate your environment? What have you done so far since you moved to Irvine?
Definitely like looking at the trails, going hiking. So, there's really nice like community groups that you can actually meet with. So there's like kind of random people you can meet up with to do hikes. So that's been something that I've enjoyed. I really like breweries. So I've been able to look at the Southern California brewery scene, which has been really nice. Working out and exercising, I think, is something that's really important as, we're in the stressful jobs to actually have like a nice creative and physical outlet.
What would you think is the most important thing for you to see in your trainees?
Really good question. So there's something called IDPs, individual developmental plans, and I think it's really important to establish that early on in people's scientific careers. So this is like an exercise where you can actually identify what your own research goals are and your career goals are. So, I just started really recently, but in January, like kind of kicking off the new year, had all my students complete this IDP. And then we met individually to go over what they found, how they like to work. Do they like to work in team environments? Are they more of a solo individual? Or do they want to go into academia, or do they want to go into industry? So being able to identify each student's needs and what their goals are, I think is really important to establish very early on. And then, as a mentor, I can actually see their own kind of review process and try to see if I can tailor my mentorship styles or, open up different opportunities to them so that they can achieve their particular goals.
What is the most fun part of mentoring students?
Seeing their growth and progression, I think that's really awesome. I mean, I think it's really cool. So actually empowering people with the tools to do science, I think has been, one of the best aspects of my job.
Yeah. Do you have advice for up and coming scientists that are going into the job market now, with regards to just starting out as a faculty?
This is something I struggle with a lot, and it's like imposter syndrome. And I think, sometimes we can defeat ourselves, trying to write grants, for example. I'm being very transparent, like just sometimes like, well, I shouldn't even try because I'm not going to get this. I don't have enough preliminary data, or, I think it's really easy to defeat yourself and, automatically count yourself out. So for me, to encourage, new scientists or people who are interested in academia, just like kind of get over the imposter syndrome. You've come so far and you just need to recognize some of those victories and have the confidence, because there's a lot of people that are not as trained and special as you that have this air of confidence, and, that is actually more important than you think.
Very true. Very true. And then what do you see are some of the things that could be, changed or improved in graduate student training, or in training scientists in general?
Oh, so I really do think there needs to be increased levels of like mentorship and guidance along the way. So for me, I've been blessed with great mentors throughout my time as a graduate student and postdoctoral fellow. But sometimes I think students feel that they only have one mentor available to them, right? So this idea is like, your advisor might not only be your only mentor throughout your entire PhD process. So actually reaching out to other faculty and different perspectives is super important, because let's say there's a personality mismatch between you and your advisor. That doesn't mean you can't, conduct science and get mentored by other people. So definitely, realizing that there's a wealth of personal resources that are available, I think is really key to try to help that. And I do think there is this like sense of kind of publish or perish. And I do think, it's really important to kind of tie into these open access resources such as bioRxiv. I think that's a really important way to disseminate your research. I think that's something that's really important. And also this mental health aspect. So, realizing that there should be personal boundaries that should be in place for people when they're doing science. It's a very stressful environment. I think more open conversations about mental health and graduate education is really important.
If you were not doing science, what would you be doing?
That's a really good question. So for some reason, this is maybe not sad, but I feel like science has been, integrated in my life for so long. I mean, we've talked about the process. So let's say graduate school is an average of 5 years, postdocs is an average of 5 years, undergrads an average maybe of 5 years. So like half of my life has been in education, right? So maybe I've lost track a little bit about like my other skills. I think I'm getting better at cooking. So maybe
you want to be like really a famous chef, maybe?
Famous chef. And I come up with like these random ideas all the time. So maybe an entrepreneur.
That's great. Yeah. And then if there was reality TV about doing science and scientists, what would it be about? And like, how do you envision it would be? Would you watch it?
Oh my goodness. I think it would be all about the little intricacies in lab drama. Like someone took my pipettes. Oh no, this person got their cells contaminated again. Just like little things like that. Like you did not clean up the biosafety cabinet after you used it. There's so many different lab dynamics. I'm surprised there hasn't been a reality show. But it like lab personalities is like one of the best parts of science. Just like the people. It's like it's hilarious. Like you can tell a lot about a person about like how they actually use their pipette tips. So do they go in like a nice organized fashion or do they randomly take out pipette tips? So that alone is just like enough drama for scientists.
Oh, that's really funny. So are you recruiting more students now? Is there anything you would like to say for maybe prospective students?
So I'm always interested in recruiting students. And for me, I'm really interested in people that just have like passion and curiosity. I don't think you have to be like an expert biologist or an expert engineer, for these different disciplines. I think you just have to have like a creative mind. I feel like, once you're empowered with the tools to do these types of experiments, your imagination is what really drives scientists. I don't want to go on a rant, but I'm going to go on a little quick rant. There have been many studies that suggest that like your GRE scores and even sometimes your GPA is not a strong predictor of your publication success in graduate school. So again, we talk about this imposter syndrome and, defeating yourself before you even attempt to do things. I think, for future students, I'm interested in people who are passionate, people who have, different perspectives. And I think that all plays a role in how do we create different tissues? Like, can we think about different, constraints that we can use to coax stem cells to become another tissue? So.
Now that, diversity and inclusion is coming to the forefront and there's much more of an effort to make sure that, STEM fields are more diverse and that as well, like there's well representation. What do you think are some of the things that institutions can do to support minority students, faculty, and, ensure their success? Because part of the problem is that, you can always get in, but if you're not being supported in your environment, you don't succeed. So what do you think are some of the things that institutions can do?
Oh, these are very, very, I think, deep questions, but I definitely think, representation throughout all levels within academia are super important. And I could just tell you something just very simply. I used to be afraid to ask questions, in a lab meeting or journal club because I was the only one that looked like me. And I was afraid of, sounding dumb or not being able to communicate effectively. So I think, just like visibility is so important. So having a diverse, lab, having diverse faculty is super important for curating, this pipeline. There's been a lot of studies that suggest, we can get, brown and Black students through STEM programs in college, but then we see this like attrition rate in graduate school, and it's even worse during the postdoctoral level. And I think it's because there's a lack of these like environments where people feel safe, where they can even ask a question.
Yeah.
So hiring, I think, is something that's super important, which means shifting what your idea of a scientist is.
Yes, very true.
Right?
Yeah.
Shifting your idea of what a dean should look like.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And like realizing that, the old ways or these old metrics that demonstrate you're a great academic is not necessarily true. And there's so many studies that show that.
Yeah.
So kind of breaking down those existing barriers and being a little bit more open-minded of what it takes to be a scientist, right? I think is super important. So more hiring and funding.
Oh yeah, and definitely funding.
Yes. So I do have to do a quick shout out to like Howard Hughes Medical Institute. I think these are one of, allies for science. I mean, they've done a lot in supporting, high risk, high reward projects, throughout many different types of disciplines, but, putting resources and betting on people that are traditionally not represented in science is transformative. So agencies like HHMI, I know the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is, starting to take those approaches. So, we're thankful for, these other entities of supporting, diverse science, but I think, at all levels, this should be in place. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think that's all I don't want to keep you. You're a very busy person. All right. I think those are all the questions I have.